There are a couple of phrases I hate to hear on the water. And one of them is when I ask someone, why did you choose that fly? And they say, I just thought I'd try flies at random until I found something that works. There's a better way. We can't always know what fly will work, but if we understand how flies appear to trout under different conditions, we can make educated guesses. And those guesses are a lot more effective than random trial and error. UV materials can make our nymphs stand out, helping trout see them more easily. But here's the catch. We showed you in part 2 that UV materials only work under certain conditions, and different types of colors and UV materials work best in different conditions. So you need to know what types of materials you have in order to determine if and when to use them. To figure out which materials really have UV properties, you only need 2 things. A UV lamp, which most of us already have one for curing our UV resin, and an RGB light that uses different color LEDs to shine a specific color of light. You can buy these fairly cheaply online, and I'll leave links in the description for a couple of options. Start by shining the UV lamp on your fly tying materials. If you see no visible reaction, the material is either UV reflective or it has no UV properties at all. Without some specialized equipment, you can't know for sure. If you see no visible reaction under your UV light, then you're taking the manufacturer at their word that the material has UV properties, in this case, that the material reflects UV. If you do see a visible change, the material is fluorescent. Now shine blue light from your RGB light on your material. If it glows under UV but not blue light, it's UV fluorescent. If it glows under both, it's just fluorescent. Now that you have determined what type of UV materials you're using, you need to determine where and when they will work. We learned in part 1 that UV properties of UV reflective materials will only be visible to smaller young trout. We also learned in part 2 that UV fluorescent materials can be used to make your nymphs change their appearance in certain conditions. And we learned in part 2 that different colors of some fluorescent materials work in a broad range of conditions, making them more useful, but only if we know what those conditions are. Here's a trick. In a dark room, lay fluorescent materials on tissue paper and cycle through different colors of light using the RGB light. Because the white tissue paper will reflect all of the colored light, it will show you which ones will stand out or blend in under different watercolors. It will not be an exact representation of how the materials will look under the water, but it will give you an idea of which materials will fluoresce in different situations. The color of light the RGB lights emit will be measured in degrees, 1 through 360. Most of the waters we fish will be represented by about 15 degrees through 240 degrees. If we use this chartreuse bead, which is kind of a yellower chartreuse, and shine orange, yellow, or green light on it, you see it blends right in. Only the black speckles keep it visible, meaning that it will also blend in under the surface in orange, yellow, or green water. We can't show you every material and every color of light, but I'll give you another couple examples. We rarely tie flies that are one color. We know that contrast helps our fly to stand out. An exception to this is the mop fly. Love it or hate it, we know the mop fly catches fish. Mop material comes in lots of colors. If we look at a few colors of mop material under different colors of light, you can see how different their appearance can be. Here at Troutwise, one of our most effective mop flies is this pink or salmon color. When many of our local waters are very dirty, the water is frequently an orangish color. You can see that the salmon mop material stands out well in this color light and seems to have a more natural color to it. But under bluish light, it appears gray. And this goes both ways. Sometimes you want a fly that stands out more. Sometimes you want a fly that doesn't stand out. As you get familiar with your materials, you'll start to see flies differently. You'll know which colors make sense for the water in front of you. So, when's the best time to use UV materials? We found that flies, especially small flies, with a small fluorescent bead like the micro sexy waltz, work well on cloudy, overcast days. And not just for small fish, but big fish as well. When you have broken clouds, when most of the sky is cloudy but you can see a bit of blue sky here and there, or when you have total cloud cover but the clouds are thin so it's not overly dark, something strange happens. Under these conditions, we actually get more UVA than we do on a cloudless day. It has to do with how the UV reacts as it passes through the cloud. So on days like this, the UVA might represent a larger percentage of the sunlight reaching the water. The UVA won't penetrate any further under the water because of the particles that we learned about in part 2, but where it does penetrate the water, there may be more of it. Trout that can perceive UV can only perceive UVA radiation. Most of the UV lamps that we use emit UVA, by the way. We learned in part 2 that fluorescent materials will typically glow brightest under higher energy UV radiation. So we found that fishing small flies with small fluorescent orange beads in relatively shallow water, maybe 2 to 3 feet, is very effective under these conditions. And it's probably safe to assume that fluorescent hotspots will be very similar in these conditions. We love UV resin because it makes tying faster, but cured resins don't all behave the same. Some fluoresce under UV. Others are totally clear. This means a resin you thought was invisible might actually have a fluorescent glow or even turn opaque under the wrong conditions, and that means that your fly may appear very different than you hoped. So you might want to test your cured, not when you're curing it with the UV light, but after you've cured it, test it under the UV lamp and the RGB light as well. There are dozens and dozens of UV resins out there, and each one may look different under different conditions. Even thick and thin versions from the same manufacturer can appear different. UV radiation means that the trout may potentially see the fluorescent glow of the resin instead of the materials used to tie the fly. So, should you use UV materials, and if so, which ones? We all already use UV reflective materials all the time. We do? Yes. Any polished metal, like beads or wire, as well as things like tinsel and crystal flash, are going to reflect visible light as well as UV radiation. In fact, if you look at many UV dubbings, you'll see that they contain synthetic pieces that are basically flash. Some of the manufacturers use dyes that enhance the reflection of the UVA. When it comes to UV reflective materials, we know that only smaller young trout can perceive UV, but most of us are not targeting smaller young trout. UV fluorescent materials can be of slightly more use, as we saw with the example of the pink beads and the nurple fly in part 2. But even if we do understand and can predict the conditions in which they'll work, the effect will typically be very short-lived in most of the rivers and streams we fish. Materials that are labeled as UV but are actually just fluorescent can be much more useful because they can work in a wide variety of conditions. At the very least, most of these materials are brightly colored, even without the magic of fluorescence. But if you understand the materials and when they might work and present them to the trout under the right conditions, we know that they will be more visible to the trout. So don't pick flies at random. Test your materials and your flies, learn how they behave, and match them to the water. The trout may not always cooperate, but you'll be stacking the odds in your favor. Thanks for watching. We'll see you in the next video.